Alright class, I hope you're doing well. I wanted to take a few minutes to give you a few comments that you can use for your literature papers, both those in our class and of course any other literature papers you may have to write or come across. I'm just going to give you 4 big points to consider and think about. There are many things of course we can kind of look at, but just one quick reminder overall. At the very base of all this, we're looking to do a couple things. Number one is to write more formally. Generally speaking, when we write in everyday life, we are more or less formal depending upon the audience that we're working with. But I'll certainly encourage you to consider this to be a formal audience, obviously, and that's the reason that some of the rules that we have are in place, including those for MLA citation and formatting, as well as those writer's reminders I've given you, which include very specific things like not to call a writer by just his or her first name, to avoid contractions, and then of course even a few more formatting things that are in there as well. The other thing I'll of course remind you of is that that literature papers, generally speaking, on top of being formal, also have citations involved. Those citations are to give credit where credit's due, and it's a very good rule to always think a couple things. Number one is you can make any claim you want to, but you gotta back it up with quotations and specific evidence and examples from the text. And two, when you do that, you've got to give the right parenthetical citation, but also a works cited page that is correctly worked with as well. But the big 4 comments I want to give you today are pretty straightforward. The first 2 are pretty easy to talk about. Don't take a moment. The other 2 take a moment. So let me get to those. First of all, a reminder. Literature is in present tense. When we talk about literature, it is a present tense thing. At first blush, this seems a little hard to do. But I promise you that at the very base of it, you get used to it, it gets a lot easier. So a quick example. Let's say I'm going to talk about Huck Finn. Rather than say Huck Finn floated down the river, I would say Huck Finn floats down the river. Quite simply, what characters do in a piece of literature is happening right now. Now, it may feel a little weird to people at first, but if you think about it, every time you read this sentence, you're experiencing it. So it's happening in the present. Where people get confused sometimes, let me acknowledge that now, is that sometimes you want to say a writer did something, but then you want to say the character is doing this thing. In most cases, the easy way to think about it is simple. If you're talking about a writer's life, like where he was born, where he died, that kind of fun stuff, put it in past tense because you're talking about biographical information. But when you are talking about the act of writing, put it in present tense. So if we are writing or if we're reading writing, it is in present tense. So Huck Finn floats down the river. Huck discovers things. Huck lies to so-and-so. That kind of thing. You'll notice if I mark that on occasion, but that's what I mean by that. Present tense. Just remember that it isn't past, it's the present when someone's doing it. Second points are pretty straightforward as well too. I want to take a moment with. First of all, try as much as you can to avoid the phrase main character. I know that's kind of a fallback for a lot of us, but in most cases what you mean is the protagonist. Let me explain something real quickly. It used to be that we would refer to characters, especially when we're younger, in books as either being good guys or bad guys, as being the hero or the villain. Well, now we're a little more complex than that, obviously, so instead we talk about the protagonists and the antagonists. A protagonist is simply the person or character that you follow and are closely aligned with during the story itself. For the record, the protagonist does not have to be a good guy at all. In fact, he can be quite the opposite. Some of the better written literature you'll find and better movies and shows that you watch are about less than perfect people. So protagonist is the word you want there. So when you talk about a main character, use the word protagonist. But now let me also point out one more thing though. The word speaker comes in here as well too. A speaker is the person, another word for this by the way would be the word narrator. Oops. Sorry, my typing skills are not the best. A narrator is the person telling you the story. Sometimes we refer to this person as speaker as well too. It sort of depends upon the story itself. For the record, poems can have narrators too. If you've got a first-person point of view poem, then the narrator is the person talking to you. Now, speaking of that, I'm going to make one quick reminder, and if you need more information about this, please let me know, and I'll be happy to go in more detail about it. That will be absolutely fine, which is point of view. When you and I talk about point of view in our everyday life, what we generally speaking mean is what we think, how we feel, what our stance is on a given issue. That's what we tend to mean by a point of view. I would say, from my point of view, I think that we should do X. Well, when I say that, what I mean is, here's my opinion. That's what we mean by point of view in everyday life. That is not what is meant when we talk about in terms of literature. Literature, when we talk about point of view, is not at all about what people think or feel or what their opinion is. It's something quite different, and actually something quite specific. Point of view means the relationship the narrator has to the story that is being told. Let me give a practical example. There is point of view. There's first person point of view, second person point of view, and a couple different kinds of third persons. First person point of view works like this. This is where you tell a story from your perspective, and you refer to yourself. You are an actor in the story that's being told. I'll tell you a very quick first person point of view story. I got up this morning. I gave the dog some food. I went out of the door. Ta-da. First person point of view story. Not terribly thrilling, but there it is. It's first person because I am talking about myself and I am an actor in the story that I'm telling. Let me give you a second person point of view story real quickly. You got up this morning. You gave the dog some food. You left the house. Second person point of view. Why? Because I'm not referring to myself. The narrator is not talking about him or herself. It's talking about you. I'll give you a third person example, and for the record, there's a few more layers to third person, but let me just give you a very simple example to bounce it off of. Third person point of view. He got up this morning. He fed the dog. He left the room. I'll give you one other real quickly. Tom got up this morning. He fed the dog. He left the house. When I do that, that's third person. There is a narrator telling you a story, but he or she is not an actor in that story. Instead, he or she is simply telling you the observations and actions of others. Now, there's some more pieces, like I said, to third person. I'll be happy to talk to you about more detail and provide you with some good resources as well too. But just remember, when we talk about point of view, we're talking about the narrator or the speaker and his or her relationship with what's going on. And again, one last time, please remember that the protagonist is the main character of a story, the person whom we are following or character we're following, and the narrator is someone telling the story to us. Now, one last thing: that a lot of times you'll find your protagonist is your narrator, but it doesn't always have to be that way. There are times where the narrator is not the most important person in the story. In the last story I told you, third person, for example, the narrator is not at all important. Tom got up. He fed the dog. He left the house. Tom's the important one. So in that case, the narrator is not the protagonist. Tom is. All right, last 2 points. These are bigger reminders for your paper. Those are smaller things. Those are things that we can do more easily above there. But these last two, pattern for discussion of works. What I mean is simple, but it's something that we have to remember to do and work with. Whenever you start with a particular writer in a comparison, I'm going to tell you to always start with that writer every single time that a new comparison comes up. I'll show you an example in a minute, but the very base of it, think about it like this. Let's say we're going to do a comparison of Whitman and Frost. Every time we start a new paragraph, we should start with Whitman first and Frost second. Whitman first, Frost second. Whether that be an introduction, in the body, or the conclusion. Keep that pattern going because that makes it easier for your reader to follow along. It may feel a little heavy-handed for you as a writer sometimes, but your reader is going to appreciate that greatly. The last point I have, which kind of ties in with this notion of pattern, is a larger point actually that I'm going to show you an example of in just a second. Whenever you write a comparison paper, and a lot of times you'll find, not always, but a lot of times you'll find that literature papers are actually comparisons. We're taking a look at, for example, a thesis statement, and we're going to compare two works to it, or compare two styles based upon a single thesis. We have two different kinds of comparisons we can choose from. One's called the block style and one's called the alternating style. And I will say out loud right now that generally speaking, the alternating style is the preferable style. Let me show you why. Here we go. I'm going to go down the next page here and you're going to see that I have set up an incredibly simple, easy, not terribly impressive outline of two different papers. Let's start over here with the block for just a moment. The block style. All right, my paper is going to be, I'm going to compare Whitman and Frost. I'm going to have a thesis of some sort that makes a bold and grand statement about Whitman and Frost and what they do, but I'm comparing them on three writer's tools. I'm comparing them for their diction, their imagery, and their symbolism. Those are the three things I'm going to compare. In a block style essay, comparison essay, you'll have your introduction, of course. Then, because it's a block, you will say everything you have to say about Whitman in this order. Here's Whitman, and I'm going to tell you about his diction, his imagery, and his symbolism. It's a block because I have told you everything I want to say about Whitman all in one place. By the way, this may take one or more paragraphs, but at no point have I moved from Whitman. I've stuck with him the whole time. Once I'm fully finished with Whitman, then I will move to my other writer, Frost, and I'll tell you about his diction, imagery, and symbolism. Yet again, same order, by the way. You notice I've gone 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, but I've said everything in the world about Whitman. Now I'm saying everything in the world about Frost. That's why it's a block style comparison, because I've got a big block of information about the one thing, and now I'm giving a big block of information about another. You'll also find that many times you're then going to have to bring these two together for a final comparison. This may take more than one paragraph to do, but there's your comparison, and then finally your conclusion. All right, what's the problem with this method? There are times that block is great to use. It's great to use when people are you're talking about foreign matters that people don't really know much about. You're talking about things that need a lot of explanation. But the problem is exactly what you can see. My actual comparison for the comparison paper doesn't happen until at least the fourth paragraph, but the fourth movement in the paper itself. It's a long time before I get there. Now let's take a look at alternating real quickly. Alternating style works the same way with introduction, but here's the difference. Rather than talking about everything I say about Whitman and then everything I say about Frost, I break this up based upon the points of my paper. So instead, I'm going to have a paragraph on diction, and in that paragraph I'll talk about Whitman and Frost. I'll introduce them, A and B, just like that, but I'll compare them within that paragraph. Then I'll have a comparison paragraph on their imagery, and I'll go in the same order, same pattern, Whitman, Frost. Then I'll talk about their symbolism, and I'll talk about Whitman and Frost, and then I'll conclude. The advantages of the alternating style is the comparison happens much more quickly and much more close together. If you look at this block, when I talked about diction with Whitman and then Frost, it's going to be paragraphs, if not pages, between this discussion of these two guys, and then even longer before I actually put them together and compare them. I'm requiring you as a reader to remember a lot of things, and I'm requiring you to recall a lot of things when you finally get to that comparison. Here, I'm requiring you to recall what I said mere sentences ago. In the block, it may have been many pages ago, depending on how long your piece is. So here's my advice for you. Whenever you have to do a comparison, think alternating first. Yes, there are reasons to use a block, but I will say out loud, when it comes to especially literature comparisons, alternating style can be your friend. It can do things more quickly, more efficiently, and doesn't require either you nor your reader to recall far back. Last point, it also emphasizes the point of the comparison itself, and that is these specific smaller subsets. These places of comparison become the organization for the paper, and that makes it all work a lot better, I do believe. With that said, please try to consider these for future papers. As always, if you have any questions, let me know, and as we move forward, continue to pass questions my way. Keep up the good work, everyone.